All right, if I could get everybody's attention just for a few more minutes. We're only going to subject you to one more PowerPoint presentation. It's going to be short. If you're eating, continue to eat. There's food back there still. If you want to go back, feel free to go back. Parker passed out some evaluation forms at every place. Please fill those out for us. That's very helpful as we're planning these workshops along. This is our last one for 2019, but we'll be soon meeting to just decide where we're going in 2020. And so we need feedback from y'all, you know, about the program, about everything that's on that evaluation. So please do that for us. What did I miss? Michael just told me. Oh, when I finish this, we're going to be going to the field trip. There's some maps back there of how to get there in case you get separated. Probably be good if you're coming back here to try to carpool a little bit so we don't have to try to get so many vehicles in on Dr. Boyd's property. Once we get in there, we'll have a way. I think we've got wagons with hay bales or something set up on them to go get around the property. But if you can carpool a little bit to get over there, that'd be good to do. Before today, how many of y'all had heard of the South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative? Pretty good. Been around for a few years, since early 2015. There's two things to know about it. Number one, it is a big partnership. The DNR is leading it, or attempting to lead it, but we are not doing it alone by any stretch of the imagination. It can't be done alone. So we've got about 30 other state and federal agencies and non-government conservation partners involved with the South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative, helping us to implement it. That's very important. Whenever you see South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative, think partnership. Don't think just DNR. Second thing to know is it is part of a bigger thing. The National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative really started about 1995, although we didn't know that's what it was way back then, and it started in South Carolina, incidentally. But the official NBCI, and I'll use that acronym from here on, started in 2002 with the development of a range-wide plan. We called it the Unified Strategy to Restore Wild Quail across the historic range. 2002. We had a plan that we put together. It was a pretty crude plan, not based on a lot of science, but more based on just experience of biologists and managers who've been dealing with quail for a long time. In 2011, we took that plan and we revised it, so we call it now version 2.0. This time it had a lot more science behind it, and it's a lot better plan than what we started with. So we've been operating on the NBCI 2.0 since 2011. There probably needs to be some talk right now. We're in 2019 of looking at 3.0 version. But we've got now 25 states who are all involved in NBCI at varying levels. South Carolina, I would say, is about middle of the road as far as how far along we've gotten compared to the rest of the states. Some are way far ahead. Texas, for example, was the first state really to jump out there and put a state quail initiative together. Georgia was very early out of the gate. There's a lot of states that are behind us. So again, we're about middle of the pack of that 25 states. Covers the entire range, historic range of bobwhite quail. So you've got activity in all corners of the United States except for the far west where you don't have northern bobwhite. You've got those western species. There's three things to me that are really important about having a National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. One, I think it's the most comprehensive effort of this type in the history of wildlife management. We've had a lot of successes in wildlife management, restoration of white-tailed deer, restoration of wild turkey, et cetera, et cetera. Those were easy compared to this. And the reason is this is so much different is in those cases we had habitat for the most part, available. We just had to go trap animals and move them to it, and it worked real well. That's not the case with quail. The habitat's gone. So we've got to build the habitat back first, and that's a lot harder than just trapping and moving animals. The NBCI recognized that this has got to be done on a big scale. What was happening in the 80s, early 90s, each state was working kind of in a vacuum, trying to restore wild bobwhites within their state borders, and nobody was getting anywhere fast. And so there was a realization that we've got to do something different. We've got to do a bigger model and work together. And so we say you've got to do it on a landscape scale. You can't do little islands of habitat here and there. You've got to have big acreages. And I'll follow up on that in just a second. The other thing the NBCI did for us is it allows us to deal with issues that are beyond the reach of any one state. And a great example is the Farm Bill that Andy was talking about, the programs under the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is federal legislation that is reauthorized about every 5 years, and it has millions and millions of dollars associated with it. Farm Bill deals with everything from food stamps to food plots. You know, it's a huge piece of legislation. The conservation programs that are authorized under the Farm Bill have the potential to have the greatest impact on the landscape for wildlife of anything that there is. If you add up the budgets of all 50 state fish and wildlife agencies, it would be dwarfed by the amount of money that's in Farm Bill conservation programs. That's how important they are. But we recognized, starting with the '85 Farm Bill, which was the first one that really started to have wildlife conservation aspects to it, we figured out pretty quick that those programs can either be negative for bobwhite quail or they can be positive, depending on how they're written and how they're implemented. So what the NBCI, the development that the NBCI gave us, is it gave us the ability to have influence on that when farm bills are being rewritten. And in fact, the NBCI has a full-time employee in Washington, D.C., and that's all they do every day, all day, is they talk to Congress people, particularly staffers of Congress people, because they're really doing all the writing when it comes right down to it, and trying to get across the importance of quail, the tradition of quail hunting, bird dogs, all of that, and how it ties into the bigger picture. And so without NBCI, we wouldn't have had that, and the farm bills we would have seen would not be as favorable to quail as they are now. Not that we don't have still work to do, we do. The thing that the 2.0 version did for us that we didn't have before is it identified the areas in each of those 25 states where the likelihood of success is the greatest. If we do good habitat management on the ground, we will get bird response. And I can't explain to you all the intricacies of how this was done. It was a model that people a lot smarter than me came up with down at Tall Timbers. And it had a lot of different inputs, like, percent ag land in the county, chance that that land's going to continue to be ag land in the future. I don't know how many inputs the model had. But at the end of the day, it spit this map out. The dark blue being those areas in each state where if you do good habitat work, you'll get good results. So it's not perfect, I'm sure, and I always say that for South Carolina at least, we probably could have sat down with the right people in a room with crayons and a piece of paper and colored it, and it would have come out pretty much like that anyway, just based on what we knew. But this is more science-based evidence to back us up. So bottom line is we have potential for 4.7 million new coveys of quail if you add up the potential in both the high priority areas and the medium priority, which are the orange areas right there. So huge potential out there. So after that came out, South Carolina took it, and we came up with our state level plan, which later became the South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative. Won't go into all the details of that. That was a big job just to get that document done. But bottom line here is, in South Carolina, we have potential if we work in the blue and the orange medium priority areas, of putting over 50,000 new coveys on the ground on over 7 million acres. That sounds daunting, but it's very doable. Here were our 4 objectives for South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative. we're not going to talk about 1, 3, or 4. I want you to focus on number 2, because this is really the bedrock of the National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. That's focal areas. The 2.0 plan recognized that every state needed to figure out how to focus their effort into these focal areas, picked using the model that we saw on the map there, because that gives you that landscape scale effect that we didn't have before when we were working on individual farms or individual management areas. So we've got focal areas now. So in South Carolina, and we just kind of arbitrarily said we're going to have 4 focal areas to start with, because we thought that was what we could handle at that time. And those are what we call the Indian Creek focal area, all of Union, Newberry County, Darlington, Lee, Chesterfield, Calhoun, Orangeburg, Clarendon, and Hampton, Allendale. And so the way we located those was, first step was we wanted one in each ecoregion of the state, Piedmont, PD, Low Country, Midlands, and we wanted to, as much as we could, operate in those dark blue, orange areas. Now, here's where I give the disclaimer. If you're not in the dark blue or the orange, don't worry. We will help you. If you're interested in quail, and unless you're in the brown areas or your no-go, like downtown Columbia, if you're there, we can't do much for you. But other than that, we will help you if you have an interest, whether you're in a focal area or not. But we are trying to focus most of our effort into these 4 focal areas. The other thing with the focal areas, is each one of them has at least one large piece of public land in it where we're doing intensive habitat restoration, and then we're trying to bring the private lands around that into it. Again, trying to get that landscape, big scale effect going. So you can see the large lands there up here. It's the Sand Hills National Wildlife Refuge. They've dedicated about 3,000 acres of their 40,000 acre refuge to the Bobwhite Initiative. Only National Wildlife Refuge in the country that's done that, by the way. Up here where y'all are, or where we are, is Indian Creek. Is primarily national forest land on the Inner Ranger District, other side of I-26 for the most part. Down here, the DNR has 25,000 acres, pretty well contiguous in our Webb Center complex, and that's where we're anchoring off there. And then in the Midlands area, we've got an area called Oakley Wildlife Management Area, which is actually owned by South Carolina Forestry Commission. I don't know where Jamie went, but it's in our WMA program. That's a unique area because it's about it's about 2,000 acres, about half of it is row crop farming, commercial row crop farming that's leased to a local farmer. So that's a great opportunity for us to demonstrate how to integrate bobwhite management with farming where you have to make money off the land through ag production. What's that?
The total acreage of Oakley.
About 2,000. It's about 1,000 forested and 1,000 row crop. I think that's right. I need Jamie to back me up on that. So that's the 4 focal areas. We are talking about additional focal areas, adding. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. We're thinking about possibly one over on the Long Cane district of the Forest Service over here. And we're thinking about one. We've actually got a little bit of work started up here on Francis Marion National Forest on a unit called the Price Landing unit there, which is about 6,000 acres. And we're working up here with a real unique project up here with the Kings Mountain National Military Park, as well as the state park that's adjacent to it. Their interest is whenever the Revolutionary War battle happened up there, the reason the park is there, it didn't look anything like it looks now. It was a Piedmont prairie, as you heard earlier. Now it's a locked down, solid oak pine forest. Nothing like it was. They want to return it to what it looked like when the battle happened. Guess what? That's quail habitat. So that's the reason we're interested in working with them. Bottom line for South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative, we want to increase our bobwhite population by fourfold. When 2011 NBCI came out, version 2, it estimated we had about 1 covey of quail per 400 acres across the state. Obviously not uniformly across the state. There's hot pockets and low spots. We want to get that down to 1 covey per 100 acres. So when you look at it that way, it looks a lot better than that add 50,000 new coveys deal. But it's basically the same thing. And we're going to hammer this into you until you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. Habitat is the key to this. That's why the birds went away, and that's the only thing that's going to bring them back. Got to have habitat. And you've seen these slides before, but I want to re-emphasize this from earlier presentations Corey's starting with. This isn't just a quail problem. This is a whole suite of species, a lot of birds, but other species too, that are declining at the same rate for the same reason across a huge geographic area. So there's the loggerhead shrike and the quail. This is breeding bird survey data, goes back to 1966. That's pretty good data set there. And here's all these other birds that we talk about. So within the Bobwhite Initiative, we do monitoring, right? Because if you do something, you need to know what happened. So we do some pretty heavy monitoring inside these focal areas to see what the quail population is doing, but we also monitor 6 of these other non-game birds at the same time to see what their populations are doing, because if quail are coming up, they should be coming up too. So I'll leave you with some encouraging numbers. These are from 2018. We haven't got all our data in from 2019 yet. We hadn't even run fall covey counts yet. But last year we do spring bobwhite quail whistle counts across the entire state. Have been doing those since 1979. Same route every year for the most part. Sometimes you got to abandon the route when it gets too much traffic on it and you can't hear. But the whistle counts have increased for the 3rd year in a row. Last year, several routes had the highest number of birds they'd had in 10 years. 2 routes had all-time highs. In the summertime, we do a brood survey in conjunction with our turkey survey. Our staff, as well as a lot of other cooperators, simply record when they see a hen turkey with poults or a hen or a cock quail with chicks. They record that. They're not supposed to go out looking for them. They're just supposed to record them in the routine, their daily routine. And so on that, the quail broods had the highest number of juveniles since 2010. Good age ratio, really good. Average brood size, 8.5 birds. That's outstanding. What you don't want to see is a lot of adults without chicks. That indicates they didn't have successful reproduction. That was lowest since 2012. And the 6 songbird species all increasing on monitored areas. This year we've only really done, well, the brood survey's over, but they hadn't compiled the data yet. But the spring whistle counts, we do both the statewide count, and then within the focal areas we do more intensive listening for calling bobwhites. And Michael Hook ran these in the Indian Creek area, and look what the population did from 2018 to 2019. Went from 9 to 28, just in Indian Creek area. Why did that happen? Well, it's because there's a whole bunch of habitat work happening in that Indian Creek area, a whole bunch. So, and again, 2019 statewide increase for the 4th year in a row. Now let me put that in perspective. That's good, because they're going up, but they're still 70% down from where they were when we started in 1979. So keep it in perspective. But at least it's going the right direction. And we believe it's because of habitat work. Any questions? Just know that South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative is a big partnership. It's part of a bigger thing. And if you're social media savvy, which would not be me, but we've got a guy up in Spartanburg that still amazes me And Michael, every day, a guy up in Spartanburg who volunteers and does all of our social media stuff for South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative. Doesn't get paid a penny. And he's as good at it as anybody we've got. Yes, sir.
So with the habitat restoration, is it kind of a, if you build it, they will come type of situation? If you get the habitat right, the birds will come, you never have to restock with trapper and live birds?
Well, first, the restocking doesn't work unless you use wild birds, translocate wild birds. The pen-raised quail don't have the survival skills to make it, to cause a population to increase. That's been proven time and time again, over 100 years probably. The translocation of wild birds will work if you've got the habitat there to put them into. But that's got to come first. And the problem with the translocation is there's not a lot of sources to get the wild birds from.
Nobody gives you.
You know, you can, pretty much the only game in town is you got to go through tall timbers, because they've got access to properties down there in North Florida and South Georgia that do have enough birds to give some up, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. And the first thing they're going to do is come to your property, evaluate the habitat, and probably tell you, check back with us in 3 years when you get the habitat like it needs to be. And there's a minimum acreage, I'm not sure what it is, probably 1,500, 2,000 acres contiguous. So we can't rely on that. I mean, that might help us along the way. New Jersey got birds from South Georgia and put them on one of their wildlife management areas last year. At first, they did real well. They had spent 3 to 5 years, getting the habitat in shape. And New Jersey used to have a lot of quail. I wouldn't have thought that, but they did historically. They put the wild birds on there. They did really well for the first year, but now I'm hearing maybe not so much. So, anyway.
But to answer your question too, some of my most satisfying phone calls are from landowners that's put the habitat on the ground. Like, we didn't believe you, but the other day I heard a bird whistling in the backyard. And it's not guaranteed by any means, but a lot of times there's enough of a residual population around. And if you do build it, they'll show up and utilize it. And if you happen to have some on your property already, and then you do a little bit of work, that'll take off.
And that's where the focal area concept, again, is very important, because the more habitat you have in a blob, the more likelihood that somebody that starts doing habitat work is going to have success. If you took 2,000 contiguous acres and put it somewhere where there is no quail habitat for miles around, none, zero, and no birds, you're probably not going to have the success, certainly not the level of success you would have if you weren't an island like that. So the connectivity is really important. Any other questions? If you do Facebook, I don't do the only Facebook page I go to is South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative. I don't have one personally, but there's some good stuff, including this. All these presentations today have been videoed now by our capable video staff there, and they will appear on the South Carolina Bobwhite Initiative Facebook page pretty soon. Okay, we need to go to the field. Now's the more fun part for everybody.